Welcome back. And I'm doing A Christmas Carol from 1999, which is a strong Scrooge trapped in a very stiff production, and I would rate it a 5.5 out of 10, maybe a 6 on a good day. Going into A Christmas Carol with Patrick Stewart, I had fairly measured expectations. This is a TV movie, so not a big theatrical spectacle. And I knew the appeal here was never meant to be a very flashy movie, no flashy visuals or a really bold reinterpretation. What I didn't expect though was how much Stewart himself would outshine almost everything around him. I mean, he does a really good job. And that's both the movie's greatest strength and its biggest limitation. Patrick Stewart delivers a substantive, serious performance as Ebenezer Scrooge. He treats the role with weight and respect, and it really shows. His Scrooge is cold, he's rigid, and emotionally closed off early on, and there's a real sense of internal struggle as the story progresses. In isolation, it's a strong piece of acting, it really is. Honestly, strong enough that it makes the rest of the film feel weaker by comparison. The opening scenes of Scrooge's office are a good example here. Stewart's delivery of the dismissive lines toward charity collectors and his curt treatment of Cratchit feel grounded and very believable. He's not cartoonishly cruel, he's really controlled. He's precise and he's unpleasant in a very human way, but unpleasant nonetheless. You believe this man has lived his life and this way for, well, decades really. The problem is that the production around him often feels like it can't really quite match that level. Visually and structurally, the film frequently feels more like a stage play than a cinematic adaptation. Scenes are dialogue heavy, which is fine, but they're blocked in a very traditional way and rarely use the camera to add any, well, energy or momentum to it. Nothing special is going on visually. We have long conversations that play out almost as if the audience is meant to be sitting in a theater rather than watching a film. This is especially noticeable during the ghosts visits. Jacob Marley's appearance, for example, should feel unsettling and otherworldly. Instead, it comes across as restrained and somewhat flat. The chains are there, sure, the warning is there as well, but the special effects are modest and the scene lacks visual impact, the visual impact that you might expect or want, really. It works in a narrative sense, but not on a visual level. The ghosts of Christmas past and present suffer from similar issues. Their scenes are faithful to Dickens's text, but they rarely feel magical or transformative. And yes, the text when I say I did read the books, or well, the book. The flashbacks unfold cleanly and clearly, that's fine, yet they don't fully lean into the emotional extremes that make those moments feel memorable. And yeah, I mean, you understand what Scrooge is meant to feel. I mean, regret, shame, and longing, but the film doesn't always make you feel it. You don't feel it alongside him. That being said, the production does have its strength. This is one of the more elegant looking adaptations. I mean, I've seen a lot of these Scrooge and Christmas carols, but this one, well, it looked elegant. I kind of liked it. The costumes, the interior, and the set design show a level of care that wasn't always possible in earlier versions. So, yeah, sure. So here there's a richness to Victorian London here. Narrow streets, candlelit rooms, layered fabrics, and that helps ground the story in its time and place. On a purely visual level, it often looks appropriate and respectful of the source material, so well done there. Where the film falters again is in its supporting cast. Richard E. Grant is a severely undervalued actor here, I think, and on paper he's an interesting choice for Bob Cratchit. Unfortunately, his portrayal lacks the warmth and definitely the likability that the character really needs. Cratchit should be the emotional counterbalance to Scrooge. He should be humble and kind and, quietly resilient. Here he feels oddly subdued and somewhat distant. The scenes between him and Stuart never quite spark, which weakens the emotional payoff later on, I think. This becomes especially noticeable during the Christmas Day material. These scenes should feel joyful and human and full of relief. Instead, they feel I don't know, like polite and restrained, even, as if the film is afraid to fully embrace the warmth or sentiment of Christmas Day. And that leads to what I think is the biggest thing missing from this production, Dickens's humor. A Christmas Carol isn't just a moral tale, it's often funny and sharp and observant also. Scrooge's sarcasm, the absurdity of social customs, the irony baked into so many exchanges, those elements are largely muted here. The movie leans heavily into seriousness and reverence, but in doing so, it loses the wit that helps balance the darkness, which is a shame. Even the lighter moments feel carefully managed rather than, naturally playful, even. There's very little joy in the rhythm of the dialogue, and as a result, the emotional contrast between misery and redemption feels less, well, pronounced than it should. By the time Scrooge reaches his transformation, Stewart does sell the change. His physicality loosens, his voice warms, and the shift feels earned from an acting standpoint. But because the world around him has remained so stiff and restrained, that moment doesn't quite soar as much as you want it to. In the end, A Christmas Carol from 1999 feels like a respectful, competent adaptation anchored by one very strong performance. Patrick Stewart is the trump card in this movie, and without him, this movie would be far, far less memorable. The production is fair for a TV movie because that is what it is. It's elegant in places, faithful to the text, but visually limited and emotionally, well, somewhat reserved. The lack of humor, uneven supporting performances, and stage like presentations hold it back from being truly a great film, a great movie. So for me, that puts it at around 5.5. Like I said, maybe a 6 on a generous day. It's not a bad movie. It's definitely not embarrassing. It's solid. A restrained attempt at Dickens that never quite comes alive. A version worth watching for Stewart's Scrooge, but not one that fully captures the spirit, warmth, or the wit that makes A Christmas Carol endure. But then again, that's just my take on this movie. That is just my review. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye bye.